London-based musician and producer Dave Okumu is known for 3 melodiously inventive albums and a Mercury Prize nomination with his band The Invisible. His career features collaborations with artists ranging from Jessie Ware to St. Vincent, Beck, Adele, and others. So how to create a space where all these musical musings can happen easily? Well, that question fell to Dutch architect Julius Taminiau, who Okumu asked to help him design his recently completed new music studio, Unit 9 in Greenwich, London. Monocle's Nick Manise invited Dave Okumu and Julius Taminiau to Monocle's very own studio to discuss it. Here's Dave.
I was looking for a new creative home. I needed to build a studio, and with the encouragement of my better half, basically committed to buying a small commercial unit very close to where I live in a building that I'd been obsessed by for quite a long time, and I'd been fantasizing about having a studio there but didn't quite have the courage or the means to make that happen. The opportunity arose, and I was speaking to my friend Lex, who is one of my best friends, and he is a fantastic mixer and producer and engineer, and he'd recently built a studio in East Sussex alongside a barn conversion. I was very inspired by that space, and I'd asked his advice about who might help me realise my vision for a studio. I also wanted it to relate to his space in some way. And he said, "You've got to meet this guy, Julius." I was speaking to a few architects at the time. There were people in closer proximity than Amsterdam to southeast London. There were, some really great people. I was sharing those ideas with Lex, and he just kept saying, that's really great, Dave, but you should meet Julius. I'd never embarked on a process like this, so I didn't know how it would work, working with someone who's based in another country, if that was feasible. I didn't know what extent, I would need support with project management, how these things would work. So I kind of had all these questions and anxieties, but Julius came to visit me on site, and within about 30 seconds, I kind of knew he was the guy for me.
What is it that made you know, you talk about that moment of knowing this is going to be a good creative partnership. What was it that told you Julius was right?
It's amazing, isn't it, just how powerful our instincts are. I'm always in favour of trusting my instincts, and, I feel like it's a bit like that feeling when you're looking for somewhere to live. If you're walking into a rental property or something, your instincts kick in very quickly. You have a vision of yourself in that space, and you start seeing your life, and you feel kind of good about it. It was a similar moment. There was an atmosphere around Julius. He created an enormous sense of space. I felt he was completely present with me. He was patient. He was curious about my thoughts and feelings. I didn't feel self-conscious about what I didn't know or what I did know. I just felt free to express myself. And that's just a feeling that we all crave in any sort of dynamic, in any kind of relationship. But it's a very special thing and a real testament to just Julius as a person. But on top of that, one of the first things he said to me is that architecture is organised light and music is organised sound. And I just thought that was such a neat way of expressing a whole range of complex dynamics, and it resonated with me spiritually, basically. And I thought, yes, I don't know where we're going from here, but I'd just love to do that with this person. It was totally immediate. It happened within 3 minutes of us meeting each other, yeah.
And what was the inspiration for that comment? Where did that come from?
Music is something which, interests me from very young until now. So I always really was interested in the relation between music and architecture. And I once read a quote from Goethe, and he says that architecture is frozen music. When reading that, I started thinking that that's maybe too static for me. I think architecture is dynamic. You enter a building, you walk through a building, the sunlight changes constantly, you have shadows, even the building can move like a door or a window. So for me, the quote didn't really work. So I was thinking, what is architecture? And then the relation with music, music as being, in the most broad definition, organized sound. Architecture is in that same broad sense organized light. And I really like that link between music and architecture. So, for example, music has a structure, composition, and proportion. And I really like about music is the rhythm, the melody, and the soul. And architecture needs that. Because I think real architecture becomes real architecture when it touches you, at a deeper inner level of unconsciousness. That started out, I think me and Dave were talking about that at a very maybe at our first meeting, it was like our first conversations were really interesting. And I can also remember we had an email conversation, and then Dave mentioned his mother-in-law, and he had a great quote, which I have a great quote from him, which I really love. And his mother-in-law is Elizabeth Fritsch, and she's an amazing artist. She makes the most beautiful pots, really very architectural. And David told me about it, and I completely understood. And so this is his quote. "I love her work so much, and I have always wanted to wear or live in one of her pots. They have an architectural and musical quality about them. When I first saw them, I heard music." And, that is a great start of a process. I think this describes our relationship from the beginning on quite well. Yeah, that you have such conversations like that.
Dave, you're already talking there about a pot making you feel like music. I guess you're talking about something that doesn't necessarily have a physical presence, being inspired by something with a physical presence. How did that relate to even the construction of the studio? How did you two work together to pull those threads together? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really kind of subtle and intangible thing, and it requires a certain type of mind and curiosity, I think, to have a process like that, which is what I sort of appreciated so deeply in finding a collaborator like Julius. It was very reminiscent to me of the process of making music. As a producer, I work often as a producer with a range of artists, and you find yourself in a situation where you're trying to actualize someone else's vision, which is an abstract thing. I'm always interested in those relationships, how you can actually bring that something intangible into something, expressed in a tangible form. And I guess it required a really deep engagement, a kind of getting to know me in a way, and understanding the way that I think and how I feel about things, and how I feel about things on an emotional and spiritual level. And I guess what I was thinking about at the time of embarking on this project, which was very significant for me, building this studio, it was a big financial commitment. There was risk attached to it. There was all kinds of elements that kind of are just naturally associated with a process like that. But I'd been thinking a lot about my relationship to studios and how I feel in them. And I spend a large part of my life in studios, and I've been lucky to record in some of the best studios in the world. But I had to admit to myself that I don't like a lot of studios. I was trying to understand why that was, and I suppose it led me to embark on a journey of exploration in myself about, I guess, what architecture means to me, what design means to me, the idea that, which is an obvious thing to state, but maybe something that we don't reflect on enough, is just how environments actually impact on our mental health, our emotional health, our spiritual health, our physical health. And so I guess I've had this relationship on some level with objects, with design, with art, with music, always reflecting on the way these things impact me and transform me. And that relationship was definitely there immediately with my mother-in-law's pots. And, I'll never forget that first moment when I saw one of her pots and I could literally hear music. And as I then got to know this remarkable woman who creates these amazing objects, it came as no surprise that she comes from a musical background, and the way that she structures her designs has a real relationship to, as Julius is saying, to melody and to rhythm figures, and it taps into these feelings and these idioms that basically then somehow engender more of those feelings, So I think it's a really powerful thing that design of any kind has, or expression of any kind has the opportunity to do. And it was just so great to be able to explore that in the context of something which needed to serve a load of functions like a recording studio does. It's a strange contrivance in a way, you have to have all this soundproofing and all these kind of technical aspects that have to kind of work together in a really specific way. It was so cool to work with somebody who was willing to do that to the highest level. And I very firmly focused on actually the way things feel as a whole. Yeah, I guess that journey was about for me with Julius.
Can you tell us anything about your journey? How did you see it from your perspective coming into that?
Yeah, I think from very early beginning we were using reference images. And I think also Elizabeth Fritsch's The Pot, which we talked about a lot, is also a very important reference because, I completely agree with David. You can hear the music when you see one. There are a lot of technical issues, so it's quite a complex design. So that's why I think it was important that we talked at an early stage about atmospheres, We were really trying to find a connection with architecture. So we used, for example, rhythmic elements like timber. Also, like material-wise, thinking about materials which feel natural. Also, light. Light is difficult. You actually don't want windows in a studio because it doesn't work. It's less well insulating acoustically. Like often you see, and I think David can agree, it's like a dark studio, no natural light. And also the building itself had one big window, so we had to cope with that. And I think at the beginning we used that as a power. So we worked with light, but then with contrast with light. Caravaggio did with using the very contrast between natural light and the dark spaces. And I think that worked out very well. And also trying to make, electric light, unnatural light or artificial light to make it feel more natural by letting it in an indirect way. I think that sums up like how the process started. And I think during the whole process, and it was a discussion, and, even during construction, I have a great example, which I really liked. The walls were just plastered, and I really liked them. And the walls were a little bit pinkish, yellowish, really, really beautiful, bit rough. And it felt just really great. It gave the whole space a really nice atmosphere. And, I didn't want to tell it out loud because I thought like maybe he thinks I'm crazy. And then David, he said like, yeah, I really like these walls. And that was like a really, really, really great moment. And that was like during the whole project, it was like that. And that is also, I think, I'm very lucky with that to have had that experience. And that was really interesting. And I think, happening constantly during the whole process.
Yeah, it was really amazing to feel like there was an open-ended aspect to what needed to be a finite project in order to kind of get to the end result and actually have something there that I could work in. And again, there are real parallels with making records with people. It feels like you have to create this space where it's possible for a person to continue exploring themselves and how they feel about things and how they want to express themselves in that moment, and that might change as they discover new things. And it really felt like that on this journey. It was like a sort of slow unraveling and a meditation, and it was so cool to be able to have the space to respond to what was happening. There was a part of me that was sort of trying to manage my expectations. Again, it's a parallel with making records, but I had this feeling that there would be almost this incremental sense of disappointment as you approach the finishing line, because part of the nature of like building a studio is that the space keeps reducing, and obviously we have this association with like wide open spaces feeling really great. And part of, I feel like, the magic of design and what Julius does is that he made all of those spaces feel great, even though they're modest, they're small. Every aspect was in conversation with every other aspect. So one of maybe my complaints about a lot of design or architecture that you experience in your day-to-day life, you feel that corners are always being cut and spaces are being compromised, and it's like, we'll make this big shiny thing or this huge room or whatever, but this corridor is just going to be horrible. It's not going to make you feel good. And it was amazing to work with someone who had such a holistic view of the whole project, and each space was as important as the next, because even a threshold, the way that you come into a space, it sets you up, it gives you a feeling, therefore that space is really important, rather than just being reduced to a function, basically. So it was just really great to be able to discover that as we went along, and to be able to actually like reflect on how I felt about things in their unfinished state, and to explore like what we might be able to retain from that, and keeping an integrity of that feeling from beginning to end. I think Julius just did such a remarkable job of managing that as I was responding to it, basically.